Good morning. Welcome to Walking Boxing. It is Tuesday, April the 8th, 2025. And on this day, back in 1995, Oliver McCall successfully defended his WBC heavyweight championship over former champion Larry Holmes. Now, Larry Holmes had come back from a extensive layoff. I think he'd lost 3 fights in a row after going 48-0, by the way. It was 1 fight away from equaling Rocky Marciano's record of 49-0. Lost the upset loss to Michael Spinks in 1985. Lost the rematch at the start of 1986 against Michael Spinks. I thought in a very controversial decision. I thought maybe Larry might have got the nod, but he didn't. And then I think it was an 18-month layoff, and he was sort of coaxed out of retirement to fight Mike Tyson, and was knocked out in 4 rounds. And then he had this 3-year layoff, came back, had a couple of good wins, and then got the shot against Oliver McCall and dropped the 12-round decision. That was at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas in 1995. And also on this day in 2006, Floyd Mayweather, pretty boy back then, Floyd Mayweather beat Zab Judah in a highly controversial fight at the Thomas and Mack Centre. That was in 2006. So that's what happened on this day in boxing history. Last night, talking boxing, always good to have everyone along. Some really good discussion points. Mainly, Tim Tszyu pretty much dominated 95% of the chat, which is probably to be expected. Lots of, I was going to say mixed reviews, but I think the general consensus, if I had to sort of piece it all together, would be, great performance by Tim. Back on track. It's good to see him obviously get a win under his belt and look a little like the fighter that we saw up until the end of 2023, but also a lot of disappointment in the performance of Joey Spencer and how little he brought to the table in the fight against Tim. Now, I was sort of saying last night that, it's not Tim's fault that Joey Spencer didn't really offer anything. And look, you can put a lot of that down to Tim. Obviously, he was the one that dominated the fight the way he did. My sort of feedback was that I don't think Joey Spencer really expected the Tim Tszyu that rolled up. Maybe he thought he might have been a little bit tentative, maybe a bit gun shy, maybe just not as skilled as what he was. And Tim, he stood in front of Joey Spencer, challenged him to fight, but also in a smart way. He didn't throw unnecessary punches. He was just cool, calm, and collected, and just broke Joey Spencer down. Really put the foot on the gas in the 4th round, and Joey Spencer just didn't have an answer. I think as much as we want to analyse it, that's pretty much it. And then, of course, the conversation rolls on to, well, what next for Tim? And a lot of people saying stay away from Keith Thurman, go for Fundora. I did emphasise that it's not really, the Thurman fight is under Tim's control, but the Fundora fight's not. So contrary to maybe what a lot of people in Australia think, Tim and his team don't rule boxing. They don't just pick and choose who they want to fight. They're not in the position yet. But the Thurman fight, you would think that would obviously be next. They wouldn't have brought Keith Thurman out here for nothing, you wouldn't have thought. I think it was to showcase him. And I did say last night, I thought it is the case. I think it's an absolute masterstroke. So many people talking about Tim fighting Keith Thurman. And a lot of people I speak to, just friends and colleagues and family, all the rest of it, who hadn't heard of Keith Thurman before the Brock Jarvis fight, and now they talk with Tim, and now they're talking about how do you think he'll go against Thurman. And so it's worked. It's got the average Aussie out there talking about Keith Thurman, whereas if I had just brought him out as another opponent, we wouldn't be having these conversations, and it wouldn't be as big. But I think it'll be a massive fight, talking about July at this stage. I know there was also word that they've put out that, I think it was George Rose that might have said that Tim's ready to take on the world again, and we might go to Madison Square Garden and fight Sebastian Fundora. Great in theory, really good in theory. The problem is that, as I said, Tim Tszyu doesn't decide what Fundora does, and we'd all love that rematch. I'm pretty sure and hopeful we'll get that at some stage, but Sebastian Fundora will decide who and when he fights. He's got 2 belts. There's the talk, obviously, that he's going to fight Xander Zayas. There's also talk about maybe Virgil Ortiz, because he's got to defend that WBC belt as well. So lots of little things in there that have to be considered first. And a lot of people saying, you know, Fundora makes more sense than Thurman. Look, he probably does. And Fundora, I think, would be, you know, obviously it's the right fight for Tim. But the problem is that Fundora has the belts. He's got very, very good management, shrewd management, as we've seen, and they'll make the call. I've got a feeling in the back of his mind, Fundora would want to fight Tim. I think he would. I think he realises there's a lot of doubts about his fight with Tim, and the fact he struggled to a split decision win over Tim, who literally fought with a blindfold on for the whole fight. I think in his mind, he'd be like, all right, well, if I'm going to be a true champion and maybe respected by all fight fans, at some stage I've got to give Tim a rematch, but now's not the time. Tim brings absolutely nothing to the table except risk. So why would you put your 2 titles on the line against Tim? The only flip side to that would be is that Fundora and his team would also know how popular Tim is in Australia, how many eyeballs will be on the event in Australia. Whether they fight in Australia or the States, it doesn't matter, because I know in Australia they would get a massive gate. But look, over in the States, that would be more than compensated for by the pay-per-views they would get from Aussies watching it back here. So either way, it doesn't really matter. I know there were some people that said, well, you know, it's got, you know, in Australia it's worth a lot more money. Maybe not necessarily so. I think if he fights Fundora in the States, as I said, everyone will get the pay-per-view back here, and whatever, you know, the $1 million or something they might make at the gate, if it's in a big stadium, will be more than compensated for by the pay-per-views. Keith Thurman, on the other hand, I think it's got to be in Australia, and I'm sure it will be. It's a stadium fight. I know they were talking about maybe going to the Gold Coast. I don't see it. It only holds 5,000 or whatever it might be. Tszyu Castle only holds 6,000, and what an atmosphere it was the other day, wasn't it? It was fantastic. But it needs to be, in my opinion, at the Kudos Bank Arena where Tim fought Tony Harrison. I was there that night or that day, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric. It really was. And when he had Harrison sort of going in the, what round was it? 9th round, I think it was. The roof almost lifted off the place. So it just makes sense and capitalise on the arena. I think it was 15,000, whatever, and there might even be 20,000. So, and I think they would pack that out. I think they would sell it out, and it'd be a massive event. I know Gold Coast are probably throwing a fair bit of money at No Limit to try and maybe get it up there, and maybe that will compensate them to a degree where they maybe have it there. But for me, I would love to see it back in Sydney. Even better, come to Melbourne, put it at Marvel Stadium or somewhere like that. We got 40,000 there for George. I'm sure we get 50,000 for Tim Tszyu. But anyway, we will see. Speaking of Keith Thurman, he did a video on social media after the fight. He said, you know, you've had your appetizer, I've had mine. Let's get it on, send the contracts, I'm ready to go. He wanted the contracts that night. Now, you'd think they'd have some sort of contract in place when you're ready to go. I think when Tim came to Australia, Keith Thurman came to Australia, they would have had something in place to say, all right, if you win this fight, there might be some options for the fight with Tim down the track, and here are the terms, and blah, 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 blah. I'm sure they'll work it out, but Tim Tszyu, Keith Thurman is a massive fight. And look, in this instance, it's probably one of those things. I know people still talk about Michael Zarafa, but this is why Tim won't fight Michael Zarafa, because he's still got these big fights there for him. The Keith Thurman fight, the Sebastian Fundora fight, it might be fights overseas with the likes of Virgil Ortiz, and maybe Charlo comes back. Plenty of options for Tim. So this is why for Tim and his team, regardless of how much Aussie fight fans want it and maybe how much money he could maybe make here in Australia, you can't blame Tim for looking at the bigger picture, and that's the world scene. Australia is such a small part of the boxing world. I know we love our boxing here and it'd be massive here, but internationally it means zero. Zero. It's actually -0, if that's the thing. -1, we'll call it. You know, if you talk to our fight fans and that in the States and maybe in England and all that sort of stuff, they would say, who, what? They wouldn't even care. So this is why I've always backed him in the Michael Zarafa situation, because he's looking globally. He looks at the world scene. That's where he is, and that's where he wants to stay at. And unfortunately, at this stage, Michael isn't in that global picture. he's only in the Australian picture, and yes, it'd be a big fight here in Australia. Yes, it'd be a massive crowd, lots of pay-per-views, but it would mean nothing in Tszyu's career. And that's why at 30 years of age, he's got to look at the biggest fights possible. And in my opinion, and obviously it looks like in Tim's opinion and his team, that doesn't include Michael Zarafa. Doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see the fight, don't get me wrong, but it's a business, and Tim and his team are looking fourth dimensionally, not one dimensionally. So I just can't see that fight happening anytime soon, unless maybe the Thurman fight goes pear-shaped and he doesn't win that one, and he's 31 years of age with not a lot of options, and maybe. That's the only way I see it going. But if he keeps winning, the Michael Zarafa fight ain't going to happen, unfortunately. Now, speaking of another Aussie, George Kambosos had a bit to say the other day, and it was just, I don't know whether it was coincidence that it was right on the eve of the Tszyu fight. I did see actually that Jim Kambosos put something up about ticket sales in Newcastle, and I don't know, he obviously in his mind, maybe there are a lot of empty seats and there are a lot of tickets available, and maybe having a little bit of a dig after everyone got stuck into George for the Jordan / Jake Wiley fight. A lot of empty seats there. He had a bit of a dig back, but I think from what we saw on Sunday, I don't think that was really warranted, because obviously it was a sellout and an electric crowd. But anyway, George put something up, and now I'm pretty sure it's gone. Now, I'm not sure whether this is doctored or whatever, or it's gone up and someone's taken a photo of it and then quickly deleted it. I'm sure most people have seen the snippet of it, but this is what he said. Just heard some great news that my last fight holds currently the highest viewership globally on DAZN Boxing this year. It is only the start of April though, so let's not get too excited. Huge numbers, and performed even bigger digitally. The analytics were incredible, let alone an even better gate attendance that we set out to reach months before the fight. Okay, numbers don't lie. All these other fugazis, especially in Australian boxing, you bum rats that keep spreading lies and false info. Keep talking, keep watching, and just remember that $33 million gate, all right? And over 85,000 ticket sales in my last few here, and I pocketed a big percentage of that. Suck my rich balls. We back in the championship. And new champion. Report on that instead of the rubbish you all put in your yesterday's fish and chips wrapping paper. Mister, I just don't give up, and you can get the rest. Now, I went on to George's page. Someone sent that to me, by the way. I went on to George's page and I tried to look at it for myself, and it looks like there's a similar type of post on there, but without all the elaboration there. It's just sort of been shortened and edited. So I don't know whether that's right, but if it is true, and he did put that up, yeah, it's maybe it's a shot across the bow with obviously Tim. And I think what he's saying is that, I'm, in his opinion anyway, I'm the biggest name in Australia. I've done the most, and I should be getting the attention, and I'm not. And you can all go forth and multiply. I think that's what he's saying. But I just wanted, what did he say here? So the highest viewership globally on DAZN. Now that could be the case, but we are only at the start of June. I'm not having a go at George here, by the way. I'm just sort of reading it and trying to make sense of it. So huge numbers, performed even bigger digitally. Look, I'd love to see the numbers, but in my opinion, not a lot of people globally would have been tuning into George and Jake. I'm just guessing, I suppose, but they were incredible. And even bigger gate attendance that we set out to reach. Well, unless you were targeting a 3,000 or 4,000 gate, maybe that's the case. But from all accounts, I heard that there was very, very few tickets sold and a lot of tickets given away. I don't know. I'm not going to call George a liar. I'm just saying what I heard. What's this here? Numbers don't like all these other fugazis, especially in Australian boxing. You bum ras. Okay. What's that? $33 million gate. That's a lot of money, isn't it? I'm assuming that's for the three big fights, the two with Haney and one with Mama. That's an average of an $11 million gate. Now, considering that Canelo and Mayweather and Pacquiao fights sort of draw in those type of numbers in Vegas with 16,000 people spending a massive amount of money on tickets, seems a bit of a stretch, but I'm not, he did get 40,000 to the first Haney fight, but only about 8,000 or 9,000 to the second, and about 15 to Vasily Lomachenko. So I don't know. Who knows? I'll have to do the numbers, but I just don't think that adds up. 85,000 ticket sales. I don't think that's right either. And was it 43, about 12, 55, about 65, I'm thinking, instead of 85. But look, anyway, I don't really want to get into it with George's numbers. But look, I do agree that George 100% deserves a bit more attention and respect than what he got in the last fight. Now, I blame his management, his promoters, whatever it might be, for pushing up Duard Yordan as an opponent for starters. I think it was a shocking opponent. The fact that he was an Indonesian was never going to go down too well. Jake Wiley ended up being a better fight. Really marketable young kid. But in my opinion, look, I think we saw, and I don't want to get into tit for tat with anyone, but I think we saw on Sunday who the king of Australian boxing is as far as appeal goes. All right, now I know Jai Pataya is the #1 pound for pound fighter. Would have Tim at number 2 and maybe George at number 3. But I just don't think there's any argument who is the biggest name and star in Australian boxing, and that's Tszyu. That's just a fact. Now, you know, I know George does sort of play on the Teofimo Lopez fight, as he should. One of the best efforts and performances I've ever seen by an Australian in the boxing ring. But we have to be honest, there hasn't been anything since then. And Australians have really sort of dropped away in their support with George, as we've seen. And, you know, and Tszyu has just sold out stadium after stadium after stadium. And this week, I mean, geez, you could have had dedicated an entire newspaper just to Tszyu stories. Every single day, multiple stories. And with George's fight, there was 0. And even on another plane to Jai Pataya, he gets nothing as well. Now that's an injustice as well. I'm not saying it's right, but this is just the facts of Australian media at the moment. They're all over Tim, and the numbers, as George says himself, in my opinion, the numbers don't lie. And I think if you gave Tim an opportunity to fight at Marvel Stadium against a Keith Thurman or a Sebastian Fundora, he's going to more than surpass those numbers. So, look, I'm a massive fan of George as well. I don't really want to get into who's better than who and who I like more. It's nothing about that. It's just stating the facts, as they say. What does Oscar say? It's not a lie if you're not telling a lie if you're speaking facts, or whatever it might be. You're not a hater if you're speaking the facts. There you go. But massive fan of both guys. And I don't really want to get into, I said, just you know, who I like better or anything else. But again, numbers don't lie, and there's no disputing the fact that Tszyu is the man in Australia. All right, David Benavides. It looks like the WBC are going to strip Dimitri Bivol of the WBC 175-pound title, which means David Benavides will fight the #2, which at this stage is Albert Ramirez. So Bivol and Benavides will apparently fight in October for the 3 belts now, but it'll be the trilogy, and David Benavides will fight Albert Ramirez. There is talk as well, this is the interesting thing, that the IBF are also looking at Dimitri Bivol because they want him to fight the mandatory Michael Eifert. I got no idea who Michael Eifert is, but the reason I'm bringing it up is that the #2 ranked IBF ranked fighter is Connor Wallace, the Irishman based here in Australia. G'day, how you doing? So that means if the IBF strip Dimitri Bivol, Connor Wallace will fight Michael Eifert for the vacant IBF 175-pound title, which will be fantastic. So let's keep an eye on that one. Big news if that is the case. Yanabek Alamkanoui has called out Canelo Alvarez. I'm not sure, based on the performance the other day, you'd be getting too excited, but I mean, he got the knockout. But he needs to fight a couple of better fighters, in my opinion. He hasn't had a big fight yet. I would love to see him fight Canelo, don't get me wrong. I just don't think at this stage Canelo is going to be looking at Yanabek as a worthwhile opponent. And if he needs an excuse maybe not to fight him, he's got plenty, because Yanabek, just as I said, just hasn't had a big win in his career, and that's just fact as well. So, but let's see down the track, if he goes up, he would be an awesome opponent for Canelo in another 12 months or 18 months or whatever it might be. And Naoya Inoue, the Inoue camp aren't very happy because ticket sales in Las Vegas for his fight with Cardenas are apparently in the toilet, to the point where they're pretty much non-existent. Now, I checked the ticket prices and they're not cheap. So that would obviously have something to do with it. I know people don't mind sort of forking out the big bucks and going to Vegas for fights like Canelo and these types of fights. Obviously in the past, Mayweather, De La Hoya, Pacquiao, all these guys. No, in a way, he might be a superstar, might be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, but doesn't mean he has the appeal for the American public. And maybe the Japanese don't want to travel. I don't know, but it just goes to show. You know, we spoke about the other day with promoters maybe getting ahead of themselves a little bit with their fighters and overestimating their appeal. Now, there's no disputing that Naoya Inoue is a global, well, not really a global superstar, a Japanese superstar, and gets 50,000 people to his fights in Japan. But it doesn't mean it's going to translate into American audiences. And the put him at T-Mobile Arena just doesn't make sense. Actually, taking him out of Japan and putting him in a fight in America, in my opinion, at this stage doesn't make sense either. You're getting 50,000 fans to your shows. Why would you pull him out of that and take him to Las Vegas and hope that you get maybe 10,000, where it looks like they might only get about 4,000 or 5,000? Doesn't make much sense to me. And there has been that instance just lately. Sebastian Fundora also fought at the T-Mobile Arena, and apparently the crowd there was pretty ordinary. Here in Australia, we saw it with George Kambosos and Jake Wiley in that massive arena, and a sparse crowd as well. So maybe we need to get back to the ballrooms and the little venues. Actually, I was at the Thomas and Mack venue a few years back with the Maloney boys, and Tony Tolge went to the wrestling, and that was a great stadium for boxing. I think that was only about 8,000 or 9,000, but that was awesome. So maybe again the powers that be at Top Rank and whoever promotes Naoya Inoue in conjunction with Top Rank might have just overestimated his appeal in the States, because when they said it was at T-Mobile Arena, it would have been different if it was against a notable opponent. Not there's that many in that division at the moment, but that they could have put him in with. But I just don't understand why there was the need to pull him out of Japan and put him in America, especially at T-Mobile Arena. Didn't make much sense. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. That fight is what? May the 4th, I think it is. May the 4th. So Canelo's the 3rd, and Garcia Haney is May the 2nd. So anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today. Give us your thoughts, and we'll talk tomorrow.